Well, we're going to talk more about this now with a panel of experts, two of whom are also members of the Two Events Advisory Committee. They will unpack how the international milestones that were achieved last year have reconfigured the ocean governance landscape with a zoom on the challenges and the opportunities ahead on the road to 2030. Now, unfortunately, the third member of the advisory committee, Pascal Lamy, who is the co-founder and vice president of the Jacques Delors Friends of Europe Foundation, couldn't be with us today due to some unforeseen circumstances, but I would like to take the opportunity to thank him for his work, along with Karen Sack, who's the executive director of the Ocean Risk and Resilience Alliance, or ORA, and Vincent Pierrebon, the CEO and chief science officer of OceanX, for their precious contributions to this year's program as part of the advisory committee. So would you now with me please welcome Karen and Vincent. We're going to talk about this with them, along with the senior vice president and director of the Center for Oceans at Conservation International, Ashley McGovern. Let's welcome all three of them. Welcome. Please have a seat. Vincent, you go in the middle. Thanks. Karen, come right here, and Ashley, fantastic. So, welcome to all three of you. I'm just going to take a quick moment. I'm sure many of you know these three, but I just want to take a moment to introduce them a bit better to you all. Karen, of course, you're the head of ORA. So, ORA is the only multi-sector collaboration connecting the finance and insurance sectors with governments, with civil societies, local partners to pioneer finance and insurance products to get people to invest in coastal and ocean resilience. And now you're working to activate at least $500 million in investment to build the resilience of climate vulnerable coastal people in the global south. Vincent, you are the co-CEO and chief science officer of OceanX. OceanX is a nonprofit ocean exploration initiative of Dalio Philanthropies that's trying to unlock the ocean's sustainable potential through both science and immersive education. And over the past 20 years, you've conducted several ocean research expeditions around the world. You are a scientist today. Ashley, you lead the Center for Oceans at Conservation International, where you're working to design and implement nature-based solutions to the complex problems that are facing our ocean, facing our climate. Now, you've helped launch and grow some of the field's most scalable and investable initiatives, including the Global Mangrove Alliance and the Blue Nature Alliance. So all three of you, very well placed to unpack where we are right now. Thank you again for being here. I'm just going to talk a bit more just to give some context, and then I'll get to these guys, I promise. So 2025, we all know, did offer some reasons for hope. We just heard from Jennifer about the WTO resolution. It's now widely acknowledged that the ocean is at the heart of global stability. It's at the heart of climate resilience, economic prosperity. We saw the ratification of the BBNJ Treaty, that giving humanity a framework for protecting biodiversity in marine areas beyond national jurisdictions. And that's half the planet's surface for the very first time, more than half, I think Jennifer said. But on the flip side, there have been failures. The failure of the latest negotiations on the decarbonation of the shipping industry at the International Maritime Organization, the failure of the first negotiations in view of establishing a treaty on plastic pollution. So given all of that, the pros and the cons, would each of you please, one by one, just give us your take on the current situation with respect to international governance and what you see as the best way forward? Karen, you want to start?
Sure, thank you. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for the kind introduction. And Your Highness, it's lovely to see you. I would not use the word failure in talking about plastics and decarbonization. I think what we have learned in the ocean space is that things take time. And unfortunately, while we know from the science that time is not on our side, sometimes politicians don't quite realize that. And in a time of geopolitical dissonance, I think what we are also learning, and what the world is learning, is that the world economy is actually the ocean economy. If we think about what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, everything is related to the ocean. And the stability of supply chains, of international trade, all of those economic factors play in. And I think going back to some of the words that His Serene Highness mentioned in terms of reducing uncertainty, incentives, and the need for clear frameworks, all of those underpin what's needed as we move forward. So I think what we have seen and what we should absolutely celebrate is the entry into force of the High Seas Treaty as a seminal moment in international law, regardless of ocean governance. This is the biggest multilateral environmental treaty in the past several decades. And it shifts the playing field significantly from one where the focus is on extraction to one of a focus on keeping life in the ocean. And we need to build on that now. And I think if we add to that this focus on economics and bringing together economics with biodiversity, we can see that we still have a window of opportunity, that the private sector is beginning to recognize the importance of that, of shifting from risk to resilience, and that shift from risk to resilience being a real opportunity for investment.
So I couldn't agree more with Karen. We at OceanX built a ship years ago with the prediction that BBNJ somehow would be approved, because the vessel is designed for open ocean research and investigation. And now we are sort of excited and in full force around using the resources we have to explore the ocean. Because from the beginning, our feeling was the ocean deserves exploration and protection. And I couldn't be more excited. I am not at all depressed about the situation. I probably should be, but I'm not, because I feel like that treaty is such a beacon of hope. It took many people in this room many years to get that approved, and congratulations and thank you. And now we see this as a call to action, because it offers for the first time an opportunity, the way the Antarctic Treaty did, to protect a place that is common to all of us. And that chance to do that based on science, based on opportunity, based on everything that exists in those places, to me is an enormous thing. It's amazing to me that everybody came together to do that, recognizing the value of it, and now it's implementation. So we're really excited as an organization, and we're already seeing traction. We already are getting requests from countries all over the world, because now you need to get out and protect the areas. You need the science that's necessary to meet the Annex as goals. We don't know what those are yet. The COPs haven't been put together yet. We don't know it, but we're pretty sure we have an angle on what that is. And I think that when the world recognizes the value of the deep ocean more, and this is sort of a pivotal moment to understand, in my world, pharmaceuticals and biotech, and how important biology is coming to the world. With the advent of AI and the advances in AlphaFold and things like this, I don't think that the world has quite understood how important biological diversity from a molecular point of view is. And the ocean represents sort of one of the best places for that. So to me, that the value our kids will see it, our grandchildren will see it in maintaining and preserving that and exploring that now. And the BBNJ Treaty gives us an opportunity to protect those areas before they're lost for some short-term extractive gain. So it would be sad to see that happen, and I'm certain that people in this room and governments in the world will act to protect areas so that future generations will gain benefits from it. So I'm fairly optimistic. I think we asked the world to get rid of plastics, to get rid of two fuels which are very, very ingrained in the human condition. So it's going to take time, and the most important thing is not to give up the fight and to just keep consistent and persistent on transitioning. And what we heard today from His Serene Highness, what we all know, is this amazing burst of innovation around the blue economy. That's just inspiring, and the young people that I communicate a lot with are excited to be part of that new era.
Thank you. Ashley.
So good to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to share. I echo everything that Vincent and Karen have said. I think that it's helpful to look back to understand where we are. And I think of modern ocean conservation and conservation governance as a millennial, right? The UN Convention Law of the Sea was only in the early 1980s. We've come quite far since then. Oceans is now embedded in pretty much every major UN convention that's related to the environment, and that's relatively new. I'm reminded that the Paris Climate Accord was the first time oceans were ever mentioned in a UNFCCC document, and it was only 2 words, and oceans, but what that unlocked is massive. I think we absolutely have a long way to go, and one of our challenges now is to make sure all these different governance frameworks are actually aligned and not causing more confusion, not causing disruption to the commitments that are being made by communities, by indigenous people, by governments. We have to ensure that we're aligning these different frameworks so that they can effectively and be cost effective in their implementation and response. I think we also have to acknowledge that, we're trying to preserve, and we've got a call to action to protect 30% of the ocean. That's 108 million square kilometers. That is absolutely massive. That is absolutely massive area. Right now, we're just at barely 10%, and in order to get to 30%, that means we have to protect an additional 24 million square kilometers per year between now and 2030 to achieve that target. So while we must be absolutely dogged on protecting new places, it also represents attention in ensuring that we remain committed to those that we've previously committed to creating. There is an increasing challenge around resourcing. Last year it was absolutely devastating to see the US government completely unravel USAID, but we're seeing pretty much every developed nation's aid reduce significantly. That's not going to be made up by private philanthropy. In the US, private philanthropy is only 1% dedicated to the ocean. We have to look at other ways to finance these increasingly ambitious and large-scale initiatives with additional funding, which is why I'm glad Karen's here, because she's going to help us figure out how to do that. But we have to acknowledge that we have increasing ambition, we have increasing constraints, we're making progress, and those on the front lines in coastal communities and in small island states are the ones that are actually feeling the pinch. They're the ones that are significantly already feeling the climate assault. It is their lives, it is their food. We need to make sure that we, in rooms like this, are thinking about how does this conversation, how do these government frameworks actually impact them and change what's happening on the front lines, so that we don't just create this governance architecture at the highest level that is elegant, but doesn't actually change anything on the front lines.
I just want to get back to the idea of the governments aligning that you mentioned earlier. We're talking here about blockages, about challenges. What is the best way to move forward to make sure that these governments are aligning?
That's a really good question. I think one thing that can be helpful is that the ocean community is actually quite small. We are, it's a reunion of sorts when we come to these convenings. It is very similar when you go to the UN negotiations. The negotiators know themselves. In a lot of coastal, small island developing states, and these countries, one day you're the Minister of Environment, the next day you're the Minister of Finance. And so if we're able to have those same voices stay committed and have a shared agenda to ensure they're aligned, can be very, very helpful. And then also making sure that the funding drives that alignment as well. But I'm sure I'd be curious what my panelists say.
Does anybody else want to react to that before Sharon I start asking you, Karen, about what you're doing?
Well, just to add that yes, we're a small but mighty community, and we work with partners around the world, but we also have to make sure that we don't become an echo chamber where we are just speaking with ourselves.
Yeah.
And this is where the opportunity to engage outside of the space, to think about private sector partners, cultural partners, sporting partners, bringing these different elements together around this largest piece of real estate on the planet, to focus on what it means to each and every single one of us, whether it's impacting on our bottom line, providing relaxation. Let's remember where the top CEOs of some of the Fortune 500 companies go on holiday. with their families. They get enjoyment out of the ocean, and yet they are also witnessing its decline. And so we've got to get beyond that and start talking to audiences who we're not used to talking with and working with them to drive change.
So let's talk more specifically about Aura. As I mentioned earlier, working to activate at least $500 million of U.S. investment. Talk us through that process, how challenging it is, and how challenging it's going to be.
Well, so there are huge challenges that we have to face in the ocean space. I don't think this is one of them. His Serene Highness was actually at the first meeting in Bermuda, where we brought together partners from insurance, finance, civil society, academia, and government, and started talking about issues of ocean risk. And what we realized there was actually we didn't understand a word that anyone else was saying. The finance people didn't understand, the insurance people, the government people, and the civil society folks were speaking at cross purposes, which is why we set up the alliance. And the idea behind activating that $500 million is really, it was about how do we build the finance and insurance products to focus on the resilience of communities in the global south. So 6 years later, we've spent 4.5 years with largely support from the Canadian government and the UK government, investing $25 million into 50 projects in 30 countries to build these products. 13 have now gone to market. They have together leveraged $125 million from the private and the public sector. And that's in 4.5 years. When we look now at the scope of our alliance, which is over 140 different organizations, we think reaching this goal by 2030 is entirely possible. The bigger challenge, which I won't, it's a huge challenge, it keeps me up at night, is the 250 million people who are climate vulnerable that we hope to make more resilient. And that is where we all have to work together, because it's not just about the finance, it's about the type of finance, the type of de-risking tools that we need to get to the ground. And this is where this kind of alliance between the Monaco Blue Initiative and the Blue Economy and Finance Forum becomes really important, because it's both the tens of thousands of dollars that need to get to local communities on the ground. I was in Pemba in Tanzania a few years ago working with a collective of women who were seaweed farmers, looking at the benefits of what a small investment meant to their community, to the work that we do with some of the largest asset managers in the world on the Back Blue Ocean Finance Commitment, $3.5 trillion of assets under management, sitting at the table, putting the ocean front and center. We've got to work across the system, and I think in doing that, there is way more than $500 million that can be activated. It's the people we need to focus on too.
Does anyone want to react to that? She said everything.
Perfectly well said. As always, Karen.
Vincent, so just a few months ago in Davos, OceanX was there. It helped again bring the ocean to the center of that conversation, showing how marine science can unlock solutions at a global scale, including when it comes to responsible investment. Can you talk to us a bit more about that gap, bridging that gap, what Karen was saying, from science to action to getting people to understand what's happening?
Yeah, it was exciting to be at Davos because I've never been. And there was a blue, and thank Alfredo. I don't know if Alfredo is here yet or is he coming in tomorrow. But yeah, thank you for making Blue Davos, which was a great thing. There was a lot of excitement around the idea, around the concept, and I think we're going to do it again year in, year out, bringing that to that audience, because it is a kind of, it is the perfect audience to talk to these things about. And OceanX, you know, in our own little way of doing it is what Ray Dalio, who sort of is the brainchild behind it, felt. There's science, and then there's the media, and the media is a thought-out, necessary component of this to make that transition. His belief is there's not enough understanding of the nuances and the detail and the beauty in the ocean amongst the general community, but also amongst the decision makers. So a large part of what OceanX's goal is to make these the reality of the ocean tangible to regular people. So,
Can you give us some concrete examples on how you do that?
right, so we just finished a really beautiful documentary that we're going to be showing in Paris at the upcoming Neptune Expo about Edie Widder, for example, and going back to sort of old school storytelling on that topic, and about the history of a person, of a very powerful female scientist, developing her beliefs and understanding of the ocean and witnessing it, and a very human, relatable story, beginning as a scientist and growing into the notion of conservation, as now running Orca, which is a very successful nonprofit studying the rivers and streams in Florida. So you have to sort of continually be humanizing this concept, because if you're going to St. Bart's on your boat, or you're living in Florida, or you're in the Mediterranean, you are impacted by this. So the translation has to go from the ground science up and then back down through regulation. There's no way that science can achieve anything in this space without regulation and without it being communicated properly. And it can't be, we've almost stopped using the word science because it seems like it's a polarizing word, right? It's just more about rational and reasoning and using reason and rationality to come to decisions, decision-making, rational decision-making. So we've, at Davos, we did a lot of events, we talked to a lot of people, we're developing relationships with finance. I went to, port meetings talking about, the innovative solutions to decarbonization of marine, both ports and traffic. So we're highlighting those things in our work. We're deciding that we're going to go beyond the science of ocean and into the science of innovation and future innovation. So that's how OceanX will play its little role.
Ashley, what about Conservation International? What's your biggest initiative now in the ocean space?
Well, I'll pick one. We've got a number. So we've been working in advancing marine protections and trying to do it in a very integrated way for over 20 years, starting with our Seascapes program, learning from that and seeing the need. About 8 years ago, we were watching, our Shared Seas report came out. I don't know if you're familiar with it. California Environmental Associates put this out each year, assessing both private and public investment in the ocean. And at that time, we were really struggling to get donors to be interested in funding protected areas. At that time, there was only, in private philanthropy, $40 million going to protected areas globally. More than half of that went to North America and Europe. So by the time you got to a small Pacific Island nation, it was pennies. So rather than complaining about it, we figured we better do something about it. So we started thinking, okay, how can we bring more money into this space, compel others to leverage their resources and do it in a way that drives us in an exponential way to achieving the 30% target? And we founded what's now called the Blue Nature Alliance. We took what were then largely institutions that were in competition, and we said, we got to work together. The ocean's too big. As she said, it's 71% of the Earth's surface. There's enough room for all of us, and the Blue Nature Alliance really activates through partnership. So we pulled together 5 core partners, each committing $25 million to a pooled fund with the idea that we would not only create new commitments, but also strengthen the management and improve protections of existing commitments. You cannot do one without the other. The Blue Nature Alliance is backed by Conservation International, the Pew Charitable Trusts, the Minderoo Foundation, the Rob Walton Foundation, and the Global Environment Facility. They have now invested in over 30 million square kilometers of ocean area. That is equivalent to roughly 3 Europes or 1 Africa. It's also investing in about half of all the protected areas in the world, and we've been able to leverage in 6-fold additional resources, and we've seen, not only because of us, but because of a lot of other attention, investment in protected areas, and this is absolutely critical. We've leveraged all of that learning, and in 2018, we were looking ahead and saying, okay, maybe there's going to be something to this BB&J agreement. Maybe we're actually going to get a commitment. So in 2018, a lot of folks thought we were a little crazy, but we pulled together the leading scientists, some of who are in this room, a lot of the leading policy negotiators. We all remember Christina Giardet very fondly, and said, okay, we've got incredible policy happening. There's exploration and research and this incredible story being told, but nobody's thinking about implementation at the time. So we said, what if we come together and take the learnings from groups like Conservation International and start planning for what will happen once the BB&J Treaty is ratified. At that time, I mean, talk about David Attenborough. He had just put out a film that referred to the high seas as the deserts of the ocean, which I think is both disrespectful to deserts, but is also just not true. You know, Vincent will be able to tell you how extraordinary the life and the ecosystems are under that water, and how we don't even know what there is to know. It's an incredible thing. And so we came up with the coalition and said, okay, how do we get people to protect what they love in the high seas? How do we get these negotiators who've never seen the deep ocean to really care, that are sitting in this windowless, dark room at the UN headquarters in New York to really move their hearts and minds? And so we came up with the fact that there are rich, abundant coral reefs within the high seas. Many are in the mesophotic zone, which light barely permeates, but it's a lot of times the exact same species that we're seeing in tropical areas. So how might we use this charismatic species to really bring energy and attention to these high seas areas as it's done in coastal systems? So we launched what's now called the Coral Reef of the High Seas. They've been working since 2018. It's 60 organizations. Again, many are in this room right now. And early on started working with the Chilean government to develop a political strategy to think about how can we work to create a first-generation high seas protected area even before the treaty was ratified, because we do have governance structures within which we could work that now the treaty language compels you to align with, to the question of aligning. So these are the regional fishery management organizations, for example. So we started working in 2018 saying, okay, can we get at least a fisheries closure through the South Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Organization as a precursor to establishing a high seas protected area? We're well down the road on that, working with many partners. It has survived political support, even with change in governments across many of the government partners that are working on this, and really to create a kind of a first beacon of hope to say that we're actually taking action under this BB&J treaty, because as we've all heard and are experiencing in this very political fragmented world, we actually need these areas to show that it's not only words on a paper, but it's actually change in the water.
Vincent, do you have, you were talking before about the importance of education, communicating the importance of what's happening on the ocean. Do you have a favorite story, something from your own ocean experience, something that you share with people that's sort of your elevator pitch of how to convince people?
Well, we were involved with Blue Planet 2 back in the day, and helped filming all the deep sea sequences in that. And there was this experience we had with a little turtle that was in the, not actually in the main film, but it was in this sort of, whatever you call it, behind the scenes. And it was a horrible scene of a turtle with a straw in its nose. And one of our colleagues who sort of removes the straw. And that led directly to sort of debate in the UK House around plastic straws, and led to this sort of, you know, it was already a rumble, but it sort of became a roar. And every time I go to a restaurant now and I see a paper straw, I know that we had a little bit to do with that, because it was such a horrible scene, and such a beautiful animal, and such an unnecessary little thing, you know, and unnecessary. So those are those viral moments that everybody searches for, that kind of turn the pages, like our octopus teacher or chasing coral. We're all searching for how the next generation, because media right now is so difficult, how you're chasing, you know, a variety of different types of media. How do we get the message to young generation in this incredibly, you know, noisy world that we're living in? And at those moments, those humanized moments, the one I was mentioning with Edie, things like that are really, we're fighting against, like I said, a very large entertainment business. And how do we bring up, you know, elevate ocean stories? So, and the deep ocean is particularly difficult because most people will never see it. So I completely hear what you're saying, Ashley, about how difficult it was to get that into the minds of people to pass the agreement. And now our goal And between now and October of next year, we will be visiting probably 5 sites that we will be supporting the designation for the BBNJ between now and next year. And what you'll see by next year is just an unbelievable panoramic view of what these seamounds look like and what these things look like underwater, and sort of bringing back that. And we're also working in the background on a submersible, which is a large transparent sphere, let's put it that way, like the ones we have that reach 1,000 meters, but with BBNJ, the majority of what we're talking about is below that. That will be the deepest diving submersible that will be able to reach 4,000 meters. But the key to it, and when we do our little sort of computer graphics, is that there's a human being. So from one sub or an RV to the other, you can see a human really for the first time at 4,000 meters next to a vent. And so that's now done in CGI, right? But we will have, by the end of next year, humans in a sub visible from another platform next to one of these features. For the first time ever, sort of human. Otherwise, it's through a tiny little porthole. So little things like that kind of forcing humans, human presence in there and storytelling in there is our way of trying to humanize these spaces that are essentially unseen.
And Karen, does that kind of thing work when we're talking with multimillionaires to invest?
It absolutely has its role, Ray being a case in point. But I think, as we look forward, and maybe this is also thinking about the Blue Economy and Finance Forum tomorrow, and bringing some of these issues together, consolidating milestones and confronting blockages, we've got to think about integrating conservation and science with the economy, and with a positive, future-focused economy that is de-risked, adaptive, and resilient. And I think what's so exciting, and I was in Singapore last week, and speaking with family offices, with investors who are looking at the space, the opportunities to think about offshore renewables, and how offshore renewables can bring clean energy to coastal cities and coastal communities, how building out that electric grid helps transform infrastructure for shipping, so that we can shift towards clean shipping. Those are money-making, market rate return investments. Maybe thinking about the policy space and how we build it into that. So, for example, Germany recently held an auction for offshore wind, and they have a policy in place which requires that a certain percentage of the proceeds of the auction goes into a conservation trust fund that pays for 30 by 30 within Germany's waters. So what if we had that operating everywhere around the world? That's sustainable financing for 30 by 30, and we build those conservation trust funds alongside community trust funds that are investing in the coastal communities so that they can pay the premiums for insurance against livelihood harm or nature risk as a result of extreme storms. These things now have to start to come together. We have all the tools in the toolbox. The opportunity now is not to focus on pilots, it's to focus on how we can replicate and scale. 10 years ago, there was a total gap in the market. Today, there's a market in the gap. And the opportunity for us as we look forward is how we can take that market and move it forward, bridging these different gaps, making sure that the science is underpinning what we are doing, ensuring that conservation gets to beyond 30% maybe, both looking within country waters and on the high seas. And as we are doing that, ensuring that we are future-proofing some of these businesses, creating certainty, leveraging finance across the capital stack, and building forward.
We just have a few minutes left. Before we finish up, I'd like each of you just to give a quick wrap of what you see, even though I know you said you didn't like the word failure. What's the biggest challenge, the biggest blockage at the moment that needs to be overcome, and what's the best way to do that? Ashley?
Sure. So I think Karen made a really important point earlier, and that's we need to get more people to understand and to engage in all of this work. There the ocean community is frightfully small, given the task in front of us and given its importance to the world. Getting out of these rooms so that other parts of the government, other parts of private sector, other parts truly understand and don't just give lip service to the importance of ocean and nature in our economies, in our just human well-being. You know, I think a lot about the investment that's going into climate adaptation and increasingly focus on coastal resilience. And when you talk to an engineer, they know concrete and steel. And we know that actually contributes to climate change and disrupts the ecosystems in these coastal areas. How do we get them to understand the role of mangroves and coral reefs as infrastructure? How do we get the $94 trillion that's going to be invested into infrastructure to think about nature so that we are having more of these innovative finance? We don't have to rely on private philanthropy. If we can get folks in other kind of parts of the world to understand the role nature plays in their work, then we can get out of this echo chamber and drive additional change and investment that will really, I think, unblock and put nature front and center where it belongs.
Vincent?
Can I say American president has the biggest blockage, or is that not?
No comment.
What Karen said is correct, though, is piloting this transition to the large global economy, and that's what Ray would say. You know, transitioning what we're all doing into global finance is the only way to solve the problem. And that's happening, thank you. It's happening thanks to a lot of people, right? And it's opportunity, and it's like everything in a market environment. Once these things become valuable and the recognition of it, but I actually do believe, having young children myself, the new generations are kind of more read into this than we ever were. And thanks to Rachel Carson and the whole movement, it's more part of the mainstream. It doesn't take as much work for younger people to sort of have that in their thought process. But offshore wind, offshore renewable, you know, all those things are now realities. And we can thank China for a lot of that. We can thank early, you know, European investment. But it's getting there. It's going in that direction. And in spite of what some people in the world want to think in the other direction and why we seem to all be in such a panic at the moment, I don't think that represents the overall nature of what's happening. And we see it everywhere we go.
Karen?
Yeah, and I would just finish that off agreeing heartily with both of you by saying that the biggest risk we face is inaction. We know what the science is. The planetary boundary science is absolutely clear. We have got to communicate that to the trillions of dollars that rely on a stable and healthy ocean to understand what the potential risk is from the destabilization of this ecosystem. It is unfortunately not that hard to do because the ocean and nature are showing that every single day around the world at the moment. So I think as we look forward with nature as an ally, with thinking about how we shift towards investing in nature, it's been adapting for millennia. It's the best entrepreneur that is out there, really, if we think about it. And we need to learn how to adapt with it. But we've got to move fast, and there's no time to lose.
All right, well, thank you so much to all three of you. Hopefully we'll be talking a lot more about this as the days go on. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you. So throughout the rest of the day, we will be focusing more on the governance aspects. We'll be focusing on the BBNJ treaty this afternoon. And then, of course, tomorrow and Friday, the BEF will really dive into the private sector's role in making the blue economy emerge as a scalable asset class with that focus on shipping, seafood, and financial sector. So that's at the BEF. For the moment, I'd like to invite you all to stand, stretch your legs, head out to the lobby. But before you do, I just want to give you some instructions. We're going to take our traditional family photo for the MBI, as we always do. So as you go out, please follow the staff. They'll get you where you need to go to take the picture first. After that, we'll have a coffee break. And if I can invite you all to start heading back to your seats around 10 a.m. so we can start right at 11:15, that would be great. That way we'll have plenty of time for all of our speakers and our exciting rest of our day. Thank you so much. See you in just a moment.